I am Keith Meyer. I have the absolute privilege and honor to oversee a department called Counseling and Wellness. We had a lot of just wonderful presenters throughout what we call the behavioral health track. It's just been amazing, including Dr. Prewitt over here, who did a thing on post-traumatic growth. So just a quick thing, I normally don't take this long. There's two jobs in the world that pulled me out of the private sector. One was managing Veterans Court in Thurston County, and this job. So one of the things why I feel so lucky is that we have an amazing team. And these really amazing human beings in these teams. And so I'm gonna pick on Jen and Don. There are two of them right here. They're our presenters for today. It's just they work within our suicide prevention program. And Connie, I'm gonna pick on you. Here's the program manager. And so this is an amazing presentation that they have developed themselves. And it's going to be incredibly helpful. So without me rambling on anything, you know, I'll be around a little bit afterwards if you want to just touch base with me about any questions you have. Otherwise, I am going to turn it over to Jen and Don. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. This is incredible.
Okay, thank you for being here, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces and I'm nervous. This is a new training. It's a big crowd, so it's nice to see some support in the room, so I appreciate that. My name is Jen Prewitt. I'm the lead suicide prevention peer specialist. I'm also an Army veteran. I'm going to hand it off to Don. He's going to do the first part of the training, and I'll pick it up in the middle and join you guys there.
Thank you, Jen. So as Jen said, my name is Don. I am the Southwest Region Suicide Prevention Peer Specialist, so like Thurston County and everything south from there along Grays Harbor line. So I also am an Army vet, and now I gotta remember that I had to take my own slides, thanks.
Oh, shoot.
No, I can do it. I can push buttons.
Okay.
I was an infantry guy, so they didn't teach me to push many buttons, but this I can do. See, we're off to a good start. So today, the suicide prevention team and our purpose. So we promote open dialogue to address suicide. We wanted something simple, quick, easy to remember. I haven't memorized it yet because again, I'm an infantry guy. It's going to take me about a month to remember that, but I'll get there. And then our vision is to prevent suicide among service members, veterans, and their families. And so you're going to hear SMVF throughout this presentation, and that's what we're referring to when we say SMVF, is that service member, veteran, and their families. So today's training is going to be approximately 60 minutes. You know, we'll see, depending on your guys' participation, what's hopefully, you know, it'll be a good time. On the slides, we can send those out if you are interested. Link up with us later. We'll get you down your contact info, and we'll be happy to send you a PDF copy. And if you have questions, please interrupt me, because I sometimes talk very fast, and I apologize for that. I'm used to spitting out massive amounts of information in a short period of time. So if you need to interrupt me and be like, hey, guy, stop talking, I'll be like, oh, sorry, what's going on? So, acknowledging, so like Jen and I both mentioned, we are veterans, we are Army veterans, so our experiences, our lived experiences as service members is our experience. We are trying to cover a very broad topic because everybody has their own lived experience while they're in the service. Every branch is different. I don't know how things are done in different branches, like we joke amongst each other, but at the end of the day, I don't know your experience as a veteran, and you don't know mine. We can try to understand each other by, you know, communicating and building that communication and that, you know, that bridge, but that's the best we can do. So we may not cover everything. If we do miss something and you feel that it's super important, we want that feedback. That's this whole process, we're constantly developing and revamping and changing. So if we do miss something that you feel is very important, please let us know and we'll see if we can work with that. And next slide from there. So, expectations and goals. So today, we really want to see like what brings you to this training, other than, you know, you're here, you have nothing else to do because your flight doesn't leave till 6, so you're trying to burn time so you don't have to leave. And what challenges or questions you're hoping to address. So this is your guys' chance to give us some feedback before we start going, so hopefully we can answer those questions as we move. So anybody have anything? Yes?
I was actually very interested in the title, addressing the stigmas and stuff, because we talk about a lot of the treatment and support and programs and things that are available, and we try and say like, oh, this is there for everybody, but the reality is stigmas do still exist, and the only way that we're going to challenge them is by having the discussion and talking about some of that and breaking those down. So I'm just stoked to see what you guys have.
I'm stoked that you said stoked, so. Over the back corner.
We heard that.
Test. I'm Paul Thorpilo, DVOP Bellingham, and I've been working with veterans for about 14 years as an employment representative, but part of that process is, finding out where the veteran's coming from and also providing support. So anything I can learn to prevent like one veteran suicide is information that I definitely desperately need.
Thank you for that. And hopefully we can help with that today as well. Oh, gotta run back over here. I'm not running back there, so hopefully nobody else has questions.
Other than the fact that I serve veterans every day through the Employment Security Department, I have a unique thing that brought me here, and that is that my wife's first husband was lost to suicide. And so the stigma of that, how that impacts all my stepchildren, my step-grandchildren, I even have a step-great-grandchild through this process, and my role as a change agent in that environment, I want to learn everything I can.
That's great. Thank you. Oh, okay. Since I don't have to run.
Stop. We're gonna can help you run.
Now I don't have to run, so it's getting better.
Here we go.
Now I can do this all day.
So I'm coming at this from a little bit different perspective. I work with active duty personnel transitioning into the veteran world. So, and I'm sure as all you know that there's a very, an uptake in service member suicide, like whether they're still on active duty, the op tempo that they have, the lowered manning, they're in very stressful situations. We have ships that have been out to sea more than they've been in port. One of them actually calls their home port a port visit. It's that bad. Like they show up for like 2 weeks and then they're right back out. So I'm kind of here to see what I can take from this to kind of help our active duty personnel so they're better prepared when they do step out into the civilian world, because then they, unfortunately, a lot of times they end up with less resources out there than they do while they're on active duty.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Sam.
Aid. So I'm just interested in, there are a lot of resources out there and they're coming from all directions, and it'd just be interesting to learn more about what those resources are and to hear it in one forum, because you tend to get bits and pieces. This is such a scattered sea of goodwill. So yeah, it's an important topic, and I'm looking forward to the presentation. Hi, Jen.
Thank you. Bye.
Hi, Tracy Fitzgerald, Spokane Veterans Forum. We're the educational component of the Veterans Treatment Court. So in our organization, our 5% recidivism rate here in the county was pretty good, as well as we've had, I'm going to ask Leslie, is it 53 or 60, I think, that we've had that said if it hadn't been for the program, they would have committed suicide. So this is very important to our organization to hear this presentation.
Great, sure. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you all so very much.
All right, so moving forward, so we have a couple learning objectives, because it wouldn't be a PowerPoint training if there wasn't learning objectives, right? So today we're going to try to understand, I swear I can speak English, understand and identify stigmas, the impacts of stigmas, addressing stigmas through acceptable steps, and promoting help-seeking behavior, which for a lot of veterans, that can be one of the most hardest steps to do. I know for myself personally, the last thing I ever want to do is ask for help. And then by the time I do finally get to that point, it's a pretty dark road. So hopefully we can help support those veterans before they get there. So objective 1. So definition of stigma. We can't really start talking about it without really knowing. I'm not going to read the whole slide because we can read, and I don't want to read a lot. That's a lot of words for me. But what we do know is stigmas are the negative sides. Like, there's stereotypes which can have positives and negatives, but those stigmas, those are the negatives that are based off of those same stereotypes, and they can be super harmful. They can impact communities, and they're based off of communities developing these negative views and biases of different groups of people. Hence, like veterans, there's a lot of negative stigmas towards us as a population, and I say us, because some of us are veterans in here, some of us aren't, but I am, Jen is, and that's how I'm pointing that out. And so now we have the context of the mental health system, And so my time in the service, it was from, I took a short break. I joined in 2002 right out of high school because I didn't want to be a grown-up, and I thought being in the military would mean I didn't have to be a grown-up. I was a little wrong. Learned the hard way real quick. Did 2 years, then they're like, hey, thank you for your service, but your liver's not working right, so you can go. And then I was like, well, that's a bummer. And then 2007 rolled around. I was like, you guys want me back? And they're like, yes, please and thank you. And I was like, cool. So I came back and I went. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had just hopes and dreams of not, being poor or homeless. And I mean, I had a home, if you count the barracks a home, but it worked out. But the mental health experience I had while I was in was definitely not the most positive. It was one of those constant, here's some medication, you're deploying in 12 months, come see us when you get back. Your PTSD will go away in 6 months, we promise. Well, I got out in 2018, and I finally got my diagnosis for PTSD in May. So I put it off because there was that stigma. I was afraid to get it. And I still get a little nervous to, make those statements, but it's a feeling that a lot of veterans and my peers that I've worked with have shared as well. So we have different types of stigmas. We have our self-stigmas, the ones that we hold ourselves and we look at others and we internalize when we think about other populations. And we try, to say we don't have those, but at the end of the day, we all have our own views and different thoughts on how people are and things that they do and how programs and systems are in place. We have our public ones, which are the broader areas, such as our societal views. It's that civilian view, and I sometimes use this example of when you hear a service member who completed suicide or did a violent action on the news, typically it's followed up with, they may have had a diagnosis of PTSD, or they may have PTSD, or they may be suffering from mental illness. That's that societal view of veterans with that negative context. And then we have our institutional ones, which are more those agencies, those governments. The example I use, as it was a stigma for us when I was in, like I said, you joined, if you had suicidal ideations, the first thing they did, throw an orange vest on you, take away your bootlaces and your belt. That was a unit policy. That wasn't just something that they did because somebody thought it was a good idea. It was written in our policy books. That's how we treated suicidal service members at the time. And so that again draws that unwanted attention, makes that veteran feel, or that service member at the time, feel isolated and alone, even more so. And we know part of suicide is that feeling of isolation and being alone. So when we're trying to talk about stigmas and breaking down those barriers to supporting people from that negative views, that's what we're talking about for institution. So, man, this is so slow. Okay, there we go. So self, again, perceived weakness. I will constantly refer to myself because, like I said, my own experience, I don't know everybody else's. While I was a 11 Bravo, an infantry guy, and then I reclassed to be a Cav Scout, thinking it would be way different and way more fun. It was not, they lied to me. There were no dirt bikes I was allowed to ride, but in the video there was, so I did it. But I came back for my first deployment in 2009. I was there for 15 months. I was a little awkward, a little uncomfortable. It didn't open up real quick, real fast to anybody, except for the people I served with. I was afraid to tell anybody how I felt or what I thought, regardless of my mental status or my personal views on why we were there and what we did over there. Because I was ashamed of what I did. I had that moral injury. You spend our whole lives being told you're not gonna hurt other people. That's not the good thing. Don't smack people around, don't threaten people. But part of my job while I was there were to do those things. And I was so ashamed of it. And again, I didn't want to open up to other people. And so that's why we talk about the moral injuries and then the career impact. They always say, oh, if you go to behavioral health, it's fine. Nobody's going to do anything. Mm-hmm. And for some of us, we may have experienced differently. So, forward. So now we have our public side. That perception of weakness. Service members are often given that. We're kind of put on a pillar sometimes of we're stronger than our peers as our counterparts in the civilian world. We're these tough, stoic service members. We've seen stuff, we've done stuff. We've seen stuff. Sometimes it's not scary stuff. Sometimes it's weird stuff. Sometimes it's dumb stuff. Sometimes it's fun stuff. But we have those same emotional responses that anybody else in the civilian sector would have for those traumatic events. But we have to try to maintain this solid stoic approach, and it's hard. And then we get these stereotypes based on our mental health. Like I said, with the media, they see us. We hear, a veteran commits a violent crime, may have mental health. And when civilians constantly hear that reaffirmed information, it starts to become true. Like, I was taught stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason, and that sadly has become part of that theory. And then minimization of the struggles. Again, we get taught, maintain that stoic personality, keep our stuff together. And when I say stuff, I'm sure you know what I mean. I mean a different S word, but I'm not gonna say it because I'm a grown up. But we can't always do it, so we wait until we're private, we wait till we isolate ourselves, and then we have those emotional moments where we don't want to be viewed as being weak because we have this perception of not ever being weak. So the public puts that pressure on us, which then feeds into that stigma. And so limiting access to care, I mean, I'm sure plenty of us are familiar with that experience. Make an appointment to make an appointment to make an appointment.
Yeah.
Can't count how many times when I was on active duty, I'd go to sick call. I was like, hey, I can't feel the bottom 2 fingers of my hand. They're like, oh, well, we'll make you an appointment to see the PA this afternoon. I was like, well, why can't I see him right now? He's sitting right there. And you're like, well, he's not seeing people. I'm like, okay. Then I come back in the afternoon. They're like, oh, well, we'll make you an appointment with a specialist at Madigan. So then I go to Madigan. They're like, oh, well, he's booked out till Christmas. And I'm like, it's January 1st. And they're like, well, that's the next opening he has. And you'll need an MRI, but we can only schedule those at midnight. And I was like, well, never mind, I feel fine. So, that access. And then that mandatory reporting, the fear if we do say something's wrong with us, we do feel like we are a danger to ourselves, somebody's going to come out and take us. We are going to get our career taken. We're going to get our clearances taken. We won't be able to hold or carry a firearm. It follows us wherever we go, and it terrifies me. I used to always joke, you do those behavioral health assessments when you go to mental health. One of them was, are you suicidal? Or are you having thoughts of suicide? And there was this door right next to the computer where I did it. I was like, if I hit yes, is somebody going to hop out of that room and grab me? And part of it was a joke, but at the same time, I was like, maybe, because I didn't want to risk it. So watching out for those things. The screening process, it kind of falls in line too with that whole having to go through one appointment after another. But when our civilian counterparts, if you say, my hand hurts, they're like, oh, your hand hurts, let's look at it. Not, oh, your hand hurts, well, what'd you score on your PT test? And you're like, how's that relevant? But that's this whole random chain of events that we have to follow through. So the impacts of stigmas. We know that it causes barriers to seek help. We're afraid to seek help, like I had mentioned several times now. Getting help sometimes for those mental injuries that we do suffer could be our career. It could take away that clearance. And if anybody's ever had a top secret clearance, it's not the easiest thing to get, and it's even more terrifying when somebody threatens to take it away from you. So then the economic and social status. As a service member, active duty, the biggest fear was losing my job because that meant my life, that meant my family. I had a wife, kids to take care of. That was all I knew how to do. I joined right out of high school. I didn't know how to do anything else. So if I started talking about my feelings or me not being well, that could mean I'm not putting my family at risk, and I couldn't do that. And then those reinforced myths, again, being that stereotype, but that negative stereotype, which then leads to those stigmas. I didn't want to be one of those, so I kept my mouth shut, thinking that I was doing the right thing by not talking about what was wrong. So stigmas in the military community. The perceptions of mental health I've talked about quite a bit. It's something where most of us should be familiar with. I know, I see all the reactions, the smiles, the laughs, the frowns. It's all those same perceived experiences. But again, that career implication, I was always terrified to talk about. I remember we came back from my first deployment. They said, hey, you gotta go through clearing, make sure you're good. So they sent me behavioral health. They're like, hey, how are you doing? I was like, I'm great. They're like, are you sure? I was like, absolutely, I'm fine. And they're like, okay, well, if you have anything else or if you need us, let us know. And we're there for you. I was like, yeah, sure, cool. And then I left because I knew once I left that station, it was the last station of the day, I was on 30 days of block leave. So it was check the block, go home. I'll deal with it on my own time with my friends and, with my own way of medicating. Looking back, probably not the smartest thing I should have done. And then being perceived as fit for duty, like I said, I was a combat MOS. That meant my job meant people had to count on me to do things where I had to be mentally fit and sound because I couldn't make those same decisions if I wasn't. So I didn't want to embarrass myself, let my team down. There was a lot of pressure just amongst my own team, my peers. They had their stuff together. Why can't I? And so I had to keep faking it and pushing myself because I was afraid if they saw me as anything else than having it all together, I was a liability on the team and then I was no longer on that team. And I didn't want to go anywhere else because the joke was, I was an outdoor cat, and if you put me at a desk job, that made me an indoor cat, and I was not an indoor cat. Now, I'm an indoor cat. I like the air conditioning. So, and then higher risk, again, that SMBF, those service members, veterans, and those families, they are at higher risk for those challenges that we face, those stigmas. They're very specific to the veteran population, but they impact our families as well. It's not just us. Me carrying that burden inside and not ever opening up because I was afraid cost me a marriage. It didn't want me to open up. I was afraid if I opened up to her, she too would perceive me as weak. So I kept my mouth shut. And then she thought I was isolating from her, and I was, because I didn't feel safe, and that wasn't right. And it had nothing to do with her, it had everything to do with me at the time. And then cultural factors. The military is one of those crazy places where there's so many subcultures, right? You have, oh, you're a military service member or a veteran, that's a culture. Then you have, what branch were you in? That's a culture. And I mean, if you have National Guard or reservists, no offense, but that's, I guess, a culture. You guys are going. Can't help it. Yes, back there.
There's actually cultures in the Army. I'm field artillery, so combat arms. You might think combat support because you do support, Chip, but that's okay. And I took a job as an equal opportunity advisor in a medical brigade. You want to talk about a huge cultural shock? Yeah.
Yep.
It's like trying to be open, listen to people, but I'm like, I told my soldiers to suck it up. That's just me. So there is cultures just in the Army itself.
Yeah. Right. We have our own subcultures, and like you said, you were a 13 series, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, and you said it. I didn't say that combat support, but I mean that's how different, especially within the combat arms branches. If any of you are familiar, we're very proud of what we do. There's a very, very strong feeling of that blue cord. I had a friend call it a rope once, and it didn't end well for him. It is a cord, and I was very proud of that cord.
I'm very proud to be king about it.
Yeah. Can't get anywhere without a queen. Thank you. All right, so understanding and building resiliences. So we all have different levels of resilience, right? Those resiliency skills that we develop, we all have them. We all have different levels of it. We develop those throughout our lives. I was lucky / unfortunate to have a very difficult and rough childhood, meaning I developed resiliency very early in life. My drill instructor joked with me, he's like, what nationality is your mom? And I was like, well, she's Korean. He's like, well, were you raised traditionally Korean? And if any of you aren't familiar with that, that's a very strict childhood. And I was like, absolutely. He's like, oh, well, then this is easy for you. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. All they did was yell at me all the time. I was like, no problem. I can do that all day. I'm used to getting yelled at. So I had those resiliency skills built up from the very beginning. But then I served with peers who didn't. And they had to get those very quickly. Because if not, they were the ones that were struggling much earlier on. So then I had to, you try to support them. But at the same time, resiliency is an individual thing that you develop. And if you have a hesitancy towards that resiliency, or if you're unsure, it's going to put other factors in place as barriers. And so we learn them, we develop them, and I was a master resiliency trainer for a little bit, and that was a punishment, so we'll take that as that. But it was a useful trait, and I try to teach my children resiliency. I think it's one of the most important things we can do in society to help break some of these stigmas that we face, because if we can support each other by being resilient and teaching each other, it can be done. We like to look at each other, and word of mouth between veterans is usually stronger than any other option. So if I hear one veteran saying that they did this, this, and this to get to where they are, and I look up to them, I'm going to try to follow that same path. So teaching the importance of resilience, I feel like I kind of did that, but we'll see. Practical training. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. I don't recommend going back in time and traumatizing yourself as a child, because that is impossible and very upsetting. But you have peers. We learn, like I said, resiliency. We can learn it through each other. We can help support each other and develop those things, because having that partner, that coworker, that friend, that family member to help support you while you're struggling is what's going to get you through that day into that next step. And then we have opportunities for continuous learning. You can Google resiliency training online, and if you haven't, it's a very long list. There's lots of videos. Be careful, because some of those are just there, but it's a great resource. There's plenty of resources out there for you. As we move forward, we'll talk some more resources, because I know that was one of the things that got brought up, was having additional resources that we can provide. And then, like I said, and it's not static, it's something that we can constantly develop. I constantly feel like I get more and more resilient, especially as I stand up here, make really bad jokes and nobody laughs. I'm like, that's resiliency, I'm building that up. Now I know, one, that joke doesn't work. And two, I can handle the awkward silence, like right now, see? So we're good. Okay, so next we're gonna do a little breakout group. So we have a pretty big group, so that's exciting. Jen's gonna help me pull out some paperwork, so there'll be a little bit of awkward silence as she does that. Sorry, I need to read this because I can't remember all this. So we're gonna break everybody up into smaller groups. There's gonna be 3 different groups in total. One's gonna talk about self-stigmas, public stigmas, and institutional stigmas. And the idea is, as you guys talk and go over those, come up with ideas, come up with things that we would miss, or something that's very unique to what field you work in, and how like those stigmas can be overlooked or missed. Because like I said in the beginning, it was 2 of us developing this training with a little bit of input from anybody and everybody that would listen to us and talk to us. So we're trying to accumulate as much knowledge as we can to help feel everybody as they're involved and participate. So did we hand out stuff?
Not yet.
Oh, sorry, I thought you was getting stuff out.
You're
I was
good.
talking.
So this room, we're all like kind of close knit. So however we want to partner up and break into our small groups, we may have to move about the room. That's okay. We'll give everybody a choice. Do you want to be in the self-stigma, public stigma, or institutional stigma? Maybe you have some experience in any of those places. You want to share your own personal story, your experiences in that. So we'll get everybody to break up. We'll do group A up here, group B over here, and we'll do group C in the back. So A is going to be self-stigmas up here to my left, your right. We'll do public stigmas, and then we'll do institutional in the back. I do have the same prompts that are on the screen just so you can refer back to them. This is all about like learning, exploring. I know our stories aren't the only stories out here. I was hearing everybody, I was seeing you guys shake your head. So it's about creating connection, talking about our stories, and we're here to normalize mental health. We want to normalize those conversations and share those. So let's break out. We're going to do about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll just discuss it as a group. Okay, so this is B over here. It's our A group, self-stigmas.
Jay's in charge. Hey, oh, no, I'm not in charge. I will be in charge of turning some chairs around so we can. Good call, good call.
No, then I didn't even get up.
They're attached.
Oh, I don't want to block that. You're on the camera now, too.
Oh, yeah. Stick my face in there.
They're connected. You can just lift them up. They'll separate.
I thought so.
A is over there, B is here, I think.
You better send Jen.
Oh, looks like she's key points right there.
Okay, sure. Does anybody else have a chair?
One over there.
No. I don't think that's 3.
Yeah, there's only 3.
That's
but...
a stigma.
Yeah.
What the hell?
There's I can.
Who's gonna do it?
So I guess we can just start discussing, stigmas that we see in the areas we either work in or experience. So I am not a veteran. I'm a family member of a veteran. My mom served. I currently work in the homeless sector, assisting veterans find housing and get access to the housing programs. One of the big self-stigmas I see that affects people's willingness to seek help is that they feel like they don't deserve it. They compare their time in service to that of others, and they say, well, I only served 2 years behind a desk, and that person served 2 years actively fighting. They should get access to, save the money for them. Don't give it to me. And it reduces their willingness to try and seek because they feel like they don't deserve any of that. And so that's something that in my line of work I'm trying to advocate for. You went to service for this country, no matter how many days you were in, no matter what service you did, you intended to serve. So you get access to this. This is where these funds come from for you. So that's a stigma that I see in my line of work.
there is that stigma because, some are quote unquote fobbits. If you know what a fobbit is, but they experience stuff, not the same things that maybe the infantry on the ground or the route clearance, but the mortar attacks, all those incoming, that can affect them. Like I said, I was equal opportunity advisor with the medical brigade, and I saw a lot of medics and a lot of the medical teams that were quote unquote fobbits seeing a lot of stuff. And that affects them. There's actually something called something about care. And then you got people doing jobs outside of their normal jobs and encountering things. And like I said, everybody's experience is different. And I had my personal problem is I didn't think my problem was as big as maybe the presenter's problem, or the person that did what do they call him, the mic guy or whatever, the MC guy, but in the end, what I experience is my experience, and it affected me the way it affected me, and I got to deal with it. So, and I do push that. I push the soldiers or veterans to do that. Say, hey, you may think you're okay. Go to the VA. You deserve it. Go get help. And I've actually helped one guy go get help, and he's now pretty good with his marriage and stuff.
I get a lot of veterans that come into me. I do employment services with the state, and a lot of veterans that come in, they'll say, well, I don't need it. There's another veteran that needs it more than I do. And I try to tell them that it's not like that. Every veteran has a right to the services that they need.
Look at like the statistic that we had yesterday.
I'm a spouse of a veteran, and but we only got married after he came out, so I never really knew like what that would look like, and I did try to like encourage him, like, do you want to go talk to someone? But I don't fully know. I'm not aware. I never got the support or resources, and neither did he. I mean, he was, same thing. It's like I never want to talk about it because it's like I will lose my clearance. It's like, how can I find another job? And so that stigma stays, and I am not quite sure how much to push him. Like, do I want him to lose his clearance or never find another job that, in that same area? So it's always gray, and like you said, everyone has different experiences, and I don't know what is right, what is wrong, either one of us do. So.
Is he still in?
He is not. He's out.
It's hard to lose your clearance. I mean, it's got to be up there, but it is a fear. I was a platoon sergeant. I knew I had a chip on my shoulder for 10 years, from 2014 to 2014. Now I look back and I know what it was caused by. But do you think I'm going to go get help? Nope. It wasn't until my last year, and I was no longer a platoon sergeant. I was just doing staff duty once every couple of weeks, and I could take care of myself. And then I finally got some help, and it was breathing techniques. You got anger issues. It wasn't until 2018 when I almost decided to do this that I finally stepped up and said, I gotta get out of this hole. I gotta do it, man. 2016, 2018, but anyways, it was right around that time. And yeah, it took that long, and I'm telling my soldiers to go get help all the time. And I didn't do it until years after I got out. And it was tough.
Yeah, I think too, something that might be beneficial is community resources. There's another stigma that I tend to see is that people kind of assume there's gonna be nobody else like me in this area. There's nobody else that wants to go through what I'm going through, talk about what I've gone through, and that's not the case. There's so many different opportunities that people put together, and I think one of the ones that my county kind of focused on was we kind of just created community book centers, and it gives veterans the opportunity to just come in and talk, and if you want to come and chat about your book, that you're currently reading, or you want to play some board games and get coffee with other veterans, you can. But it introduces a community that they start to feel safe with, that maybe the next time they meet, they open up a little bit, and then 3 weeks down the line, when they have a couple interactions, they've found a sense of safety within this community they can talk to about these problems. So that then maybe might open them up to taking it home and talking about what they felt like they've been able to open up one way, and now they can feel like they can address the other issues that are kind of bothering them, or that they felt like they didn't have that ability to before.
We have a community that is justice-involved veterans, so they're kind of forced into this position of
so much. It's hard being married.
when they're in big trouble because they're going through the Alpha Court, and then they find out they are asked, "Are you a veteran?" And so many of them that come in to our organization or to the Veterans Treatment Court, and then the educational component, which I'm part of, we have the service providers, and they come in and they think, well, I'm not retired. That doesn't matter. You've served.
My son has been in the Veterans Court doing the same thing.
And what it does is
Okay, I've well learned.
you realize, first of all, that there are services out there. Second of all, you're not alone. We have a mentoring program in our county where you have a battle buddy, and gender to gender, so men to women, or men to men, and women to women. Currently, that's how we have it. So with that being said, and we give them the classes, that stigma comes down because they're sitting next to somebody, they don't know if that's a mentor.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could
They
just
don't
move
know
back
if
to your
it's a
seats.
judge. They're all the same age.
Typical woman.
But they're trying
I like that.
Why don't you guys get that started?
That's actually a good idea, because right now I'm trying to develop some more community-based activities in my counties, because I see what Island County offers. They have quite a bit, especially with like the farms on the south side.
Not much coming out of public health though. Yeah, above our two boys. Sorry.
You're in the group. You're gathering information.
So we're just waiting for the group that was lucky enough to step outside to come back, and then we'll start. Or we're going to start without them. Yeah. It's news you lose. One more minute.
So we're going to go ahead and put the other groups report out.
Yep. So we can go ahead and start. So, after you guys were in your breakout groups, we'd really love to hear like at least a little bit from each group on some of these questions, like what were common themes and patterns that came across your group? How do these stigmas affect the emotional well-beings of service members and veterans and families too? I'd like to think we want to talk about families, right? Because those family members, they're the ones that are going to see things firsthand when things start to get difficult for those veterans and service members. And then what surprised you or stood out to you in terms of how stigmas operate within the SMVF community? So Connie, my lovely boss here, will be kind enough to run around with a microphone and give it to each group so you guys can kind of give us what you think. Who was in group one? Group one. Who wants to talk for group one? Brave man. Good for you. There's always the one.
So we had the self-stigma category, and one of the common themes that kind of emerged from our talking was the self-worth of the veteran to seek the services. They feel like they're not, we kind of compared that some veterans might serve 2 years without seeing any type of deployment, combat, anything like that. And they felt like their 2 years in the service doesn't compare to another veterans that did that. So they feel like they're not worthy of getting those services, that there are others out there that maybe did more to warrant them getting those services, even though they are services that were made for veterans across the board. Another thing too was that they maybe feel like there's people worse off than them. So they feel like, oh, my situation's a 9 out of 10, but there's a 10 out of 10 out somewhere, so let's just save those resources for them, when in reality, these resources are continuously being built up in order to get more veterans access to them. As far as the emotional well-being of the veterans and the service members, it puts them in a negative light to themselves. I think that veterans that are experiencing these types of difficulties already feel a sense of like being down, at that they're at a lowest point in themselves, and then when they go and see these stigmas and hear these stigmas that, well, I'm not worthy of this, I haven't done enough to get that, it can put them down more. So it doesn't give them that optimism to try and seek those services, thinking that they can get better and find help. And then in terms of the SMBF community, I think when a veteran starts to experience these feelings, they kind of isolate themselves into a feeling of there's no one else out there that can experience this or connect with me on this level, so I'm not going to announce how I'm feeling or discuss any type of expectations around getting help, because if I'm not going to take this approach, then I don't want to burden the people around me with that. I particularly work with homeless veterans, so they feel like they are so alone in a sense that there's no one else out there in my community that can relate to me. There's probably not a whole lot out there for me. I didn't do enough to warrant any of this, so let's just not help me. And it's upsetting. It really hurts to hear people speak those words to you. And so the stigmas around self-worth, I feel, is really big in these areas, and so that's something that I'm trying to combat.
That's awesome. Thank you. Anybody else from group one, or are you guys gonna just let him do it all by himself? Sure. Oh, no, we got more.
I've had a few of my veterans come in, and it's kind of an attitude of, I'm a tough guy, I don't need the help. And what they don't realize, I think, is that getting a disability rating doesn't necessarily mean that you're not a tough guy, and that the ultimate could be that they could get that help that is needed for them.
That's awesome. Thank you. All right, so group two. Does anybody from group two want to talk? Somebody from group two?
Okay.
Sweet, thank you. It's even better when you're in front.
So we probably got a little bit off topic in our group, but we were talking about the various stereotypes, and a point that was brought up by one of the other individuals was how that active duty is only 1% of the population. Well, then when you think about veterans, we're about 20% of the population. So we've got 20% of a population that's being judged by 80% that's creating this stereotype. And another thing that was brought up was like in the work environment, when you are out of the service and then you're in the civilian world, there is this whole attitude that is presented to you that you are all of these different things, that you're somehow this other animal from everyone else that you work with. And some of that might be true, and we see that in the Battle Mind, Home Mind training, but like you were saying, we do still have all the same emotional reactions, and there is that, I guess, the general stigma of, or stereotype of, the crazy veteran, which I think is kind of slowly starting to drop away, but now we have replaced it with the entitled veteran. And some of these things is just like, it's a skewed perspective, because maybe that stereotype got built off of this tiny percentage of a population, and then it is applied to everybody. So if we feel like the public perception is the crazy veteran, then you're less likely to want to go out and say, yeah, I have these problems or I have these issues. And then the other thing in the public stereotype is that once we do come out and say that we have these experiences, or these traumas, or this thing has affected us, then there's always that concern that will follow you forever. So when you say, hey, I've had a brain injury, then any little mistake that you've made, someone might be going, oh, well, you don't remember because you have a brain injury. Wow. Or when you think about the MST stuff, once you finally come out and say something about that, Lucelina actually had a great way of putting it, is that you're stuck in this box. And then it's coming out of that box, whatever that trauma is, or whatever that stereotype is, or whatever that containment you've been put into as a person.
I think that's an amazing share, thank you. All right, so and then group 3, the institutional stigmas. Anybody want to share from that group?
Thanks. I will. So some of the discussion that we had was the common themes and patterns, and I think the one that we probably all kind of went on was the scare tactics that the institutions themselves use to kind of keep you from doing anything. And obviously that starts on active duty, and it obviously carries towards, once they're out of active duty, that kind of sticks with you. We talked about apparently it's not just a Navy thing, it's an Air Force thing too, that moment of truth where you're at MEPS and then right before you say, this is it, I'm in the military, they pull you into this one little room and they're like, come on, tell me. If you don't tell us, you can go to jail. And so at that point you're just like, I don't want to admit anything. I didn't do anything, I swear to God. And it starts there, and this is before you're even in boot camp. We talked about, you were talking about the orange vest, and I was telling when I was in boot camp too, we saw people basically in cages with no shoelaces, no belts, and they would show them to the rest of us. For some reason, we would have to go in there to do something. And oh, by the way, these are the people that are here on a psych hold. Like, you don't want to be there, do you? So that kind of thing. And then we did talk about the as far as addressing it, to have maybe more discreet ways of service members to report these things so that they don't feel like they are gonna end up in a cage that people are gonna walk by and see them every time. And there is a lot, and I know that I'm guilty of it. I was guilty of it on active duty. It's like these are things that I learned much later on in life, is the judging of people that said that they had these problems. Where when I know that when I was on active duty, when I was on a ship, we all, let's face it, we all talk shit about him. That guy's crazy. She did this, and that comes from that institutionalized kind of mentality. And it wasn't until I know personally much later that I was like, God, that was evil. Like, I can't believe I thought that. And now I know better now. But at the time, and when you think about, talk about how young these kids are when they join, 17, 18 years old. I mean, that you're like building some core values and core, memories at that time, and that's how we were introduced into adulthood, was by making light of all this stuff, by ignoring all this stuff, by minimizing it, by alienizing it, by saying, hey, if you're like this, you can't be one of us. And it's not until now that we're all old and broken, we're like, wow, that was stupid. But as far as changing it, it's like stop scaring people into not saying something, and then offering a little bit more avenues for them while they're on active duty, as well as veterans to have access to the services that are available. And I had to say, I completely agree with you. I left the military in 2000. I applied for benefits in 2019 for the same thing, where I'm like, well, I'm not that broken. There's other people that needed more. So I completely I was like, oh yeah, that's a thing.
If I can get, I don't know if I can get through this, we'll try. Because we were talking about institutional changes that need to happen to prevent veteran suicide. And I lost my cousin Adam, 11 Bravo, multi-tours to Iraq and Afghanistan. And one of the complicating factors was that he was a reservist, and so I'm wondering, in my mind, whether he had a lot more time at home with the wife and kids before he had to go back to Iraq or Afghanistan and into combat. So I'm not saying it's has to be easier to have 30 days leave, but if you're there for 6 months and then you're called back to war, I just wonder if that's a complicating factor. But I want to honor him, and thanks for all you're doing today, because we got to save them if we can.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know everybody in the room is thanking you as well, right? Yeah. Thanks.
One thing I also think that we forget a lot is that a lot of veterans already come in to service with PTSD that they don't want to talk about, and they've been scared not to talk about it before they enter, because then they can't be a soldier, and then they go into to war and then they come back with even more severe PTSD, and then they're home in like isolated silence, dealing with, you know, different things going on, memories from their childhood, memories from war, and then they try to go and speak to someone about it, and they're scared that they can't keep doing the job that they love, or they can't, that people won't accept them, or they'll get shuffled around the hospital, or like a referral will take too long to get put in. Like I've seen referrals take like 6 months to get put in for really important stuff. And recently someone in my life took their life in front of the VA in Idaho, and they were just always screaming out for help, and no one, and I'm not saying no one heard them, but I'm saying there was that opportunity multiple times where if they would have got a little bit more push, someone could have heard them a little better.
Thank you for that share. Like I said in the beginning, you know, this training that we're giving, we all have our own experiences, and it takes a lot of courage to share these stories, so thank you. So luckily from there, we're moving on to my coworker Jen, well, my boss. She needs to want to cover that.
Can I do one quick one with the group? I want to honor something real quick. I just wanted something that was very insightful when we talk about society and mental health. And one of the things that the group brought up, not me, was look where the mental health facilities are located. 5th floor, 7th floor. We call it in my neck of the woods, 1 South, literally almost disconnected from the hospital. So just even the stigma of addressing mental health stuff. And also want to acknowledge the intergenerational trauma of just you don't talk about things. And I just want to acknowledge the people that brought those up. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. That was great, share. So we're going to go into addressing stigmas and why does this matter. So there's a few reasons why this matters. We want to create a society where early intervention is the norm. We want to encourage early intervention. What is early intervention, right? We're going to talk about that on the next slide, but that is that upstream approach. That is catching people way before the crisis. And then reducing those barriers to help seeking. We've heard from all those groups, and I was walking around like I have goosebumps, incredibly powerful shares. I think we all resonate with each one of these shares. And we want to reduce those barriers to help seeking by reducing stigmas. And then promoting that mental well-being and that connection. I know with my story, when I got out of the military, this is like embarrassing to admit, but like my last 6 months, I stopped reporting. I could not put on my uniform any longer. I just couldn't do it. And so, thank God, my commander reached out to me and she worked with me on a plan, and I got out 6 months later. And after 8 years, I finished my whole term of service. But when I got out, I was so far away of the veteran space, so far away from it. And I'm thankful that I've gotten brought back to it. I had a great conversation on the break in between transitions here, and I think it's just so important that we share our stories and we keep talking about these things, and we tell other people that it's okay to keep talking about these things and create that connection. My post-service veteran family, I don't talk to too many people I served with, but they're my family now. I see so many of you in the room now for years, so this is like, I love it, but you guys are my family now. Like that's my second mission. You guys are my people, and I've shared more with my post-service veterans than anybody ever in my life. So I think it's really powerful to find our second families. So to dive in a little bit on early intervention, so that is where we have those multiple touch points that might be able to intervene when we see those first signs of suicide. That's our friends, our families, our coworkers, everybody we see on a daily basis. It's gonna notice the warning signs that something is different and something is going on.
Jen, can I ask you a question? What about those vets that are slipping through the cracks because they don't have friends, family, anyone who recognize it? What's WDVA policy or your opinion about after hours, after on weekends, when someone finally breaks through that stigma barrier and reaches out on email or something else?
That's a good point.
And some people are like, oh, you know, we don't do that on weekends or after hours.
Yeah, that's a great point. We have a lot of state employees in here, right?
Is there any?
Can't work after
is that
hours.
being discussed now about what if we, you know, what about those people that just don't have any support?
Yeah.
And how do we help them when it's outside of the norm?
Yeah, please do, yeah. Got it? Cool. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, so I'd answer that in my county, Skagit County, I'm the service officer there. My answer is, I'm also the commander of the American Legion in Burlington. Not on purpose, but we've opened our door on every Wednesday, providing coffee and food. Every first and third Wednesday, providing free lunches. And we're not just telling veterans to come in, we're asking their families to come in as well. So then they kind of, if their family comes in, they might bring their veteran in later, something like that. And I've reached out to our VFW 5056, which I'm a member of as well, our VVA, and we've kind of came together. We were siloed in Skagit County big time. Yeah. And now we meet all the time. We're doing events together all the time. We got our work source folks that are in here. We're always meeting somewhere, doing something together somewhere. And it just took time because everybody was siloed. So, I mean, that would be one way we did it, and that worked for you guys, might not, but that's what we did, and it's given opportunities. And since I'm a service officer, I see vets coming in every day, and I give them all these options of things outside of my office and outside of their homes to do, and let them choose.
Yeah, I also want to call it 988, right? A lot of us have heard of the Veterans Crisis Line in 988. I usually don't share this story in this class, but I will just for the sake of this example. I had a very close friend of mine. I've been teaching our Learn Saves Lives suicide prevention training for about 3 years, and I had a close friend of mine I've known for almost 17 years, and started catching up, talking about the work that I do, and he started asking questions. We get into a conversation. He said, what do you say to somebody who wakes up every morning and thinks about killing themselves? As we get into the conversation, I realized he's talking about himself, and I froze. I didn't know what to say, and I felt like I wasn't doing it justice, even though I had content from a suicide prevention training, not this one, in my head, absolutely memorized. And that was the first time I ever called 988 because I hit a stuck point. So it's not just about the veteran, but it's about the person helping. And so I would say, like, I know there's stigma around 988. I heard somebody in my training when we got here, well, I heard somebody call that one time and they didn't answer. So there's stuff floating around out there about these structures that are meant to help us. But I can say from my experience calling 988, as a veteran who struggles to reach out and then reach out for someone else, like it was huge. And it was after hours, and I didn't know what to say to that person. So I called them and I was able to process, like, how can I better show up? What can I say? And perspective, because the first time, like when he said, I'm thinking about killing myself, I was like, but you have kids. But I instantly realized I was judging, right? And so there are after hour things, but also, like, I really want to encourage people to use 988, call it, see about it. It's not just for those crisis moments, but it is there after hours. And it helped me a lot in that moment. So I hope that answers your question. Maybe we can explore it a little more.
It's a long, bigger discussion.
I did hear somebody shout out PNW Vets, though, so if you're not attached to PNW Vets on Facebook, it's a grassroots movement where we do gather quite often, and I found a lot of other support and huddles and things from that space, so it's really helpful.
Pacific Northwest, what?
PNW Vets, so PNW Vets on Facebook. It's one of the most powerful groups I've been a part of, so.
So, now just real quick, for those of you who might not know the transition program, we actually spend some time in the curriculum now talking about 988. We bring it up in pre-separation counseling, which is supposed to happen 365 days before they separate. So we bring up 988, we bring up the in-transition program, and then during the transition curriculum, the first class they take is called Managing Your Transition, and we spend some serious time on identifying stressors, knowing where to go for help, the transition concerns that they might have, and those are all kind of led discussions. So they are putting a lot more emphasis through TAP. Yeah. So like I said, 988, we actually spend, and part of our instructor guide flat out says, recommend that everybody takes a picture of this slide. So
yeah, I love that. I appreciate you guys promoting that. Kind of shifting gears here, what can we do about it? There was a previous version of this training and we gave it, and a lot of the feedback from the audience and the veterans is like, okay, we know about stigmas, now what? How do we as individual people make a difference? And sometimes, like, admittedly, right, it feels like one person can't make that difference. But there's all these things we can do in our communities. The education is a big part of that. Talking about mental health, knowing the signs, learn the warning signs. So that's an acronym for Learn Saves Lives. That's our other suicide prevention training. And we deep dive into what are those red flags, what are those warning signs, What are those protective factors, right? What can keep us away from that crisis? Like these groups we've been talking about. Normalizing mental health conversations, I can't say that enough. The more we talk about it, the more out loud we are about it, that next person that's sitting by us that hasn't mentioned their stuff yet, they might feel empowered to feel in that safe space, mention what they have going on and make that connection. Engaging in active listening, listening without judgment. We talked a lot about our individual experiences. Something that has deeply maybe traumatized myself might not even affect on. So you went through a lot growing up, right? To listen without judgment is to put yourself in their shoes. Okay, we're there. You might not understand why they're so spun up about this certain situation because it wouldn't affect you that way, but do our best to put ourselves in their shoes and understand from their perspective, it could be the end of that world that they're facing. Also with active listening, cell phones, smartwatches, those make somebody feel like a burden. If they're telling you their worst moment and we're reading a text on our smartwatch or our phone lights up, I have a knee-jerk reaction. If my phone lights up, I look at it. That feels like crap. I've told people some stuff about myself and they're like on their phone and stuff. I'm like, you know what? Never mind. So I think tech is something to be mindful of as well. Know your local resources. I'm from Tacoma. I know stuff in Spokane is different than Tacoma. There's different resources and everywhere in my county and in my city. So it's kind of a call to action. Know what is available out there before the crisis happens. Know who you can turn to. And then 988, which we already talked about.
Jan? Question?
Yeah, what you got?
What happened to your friend? Scenario.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So we had a secondary conversation and I just like was honest. I can't fake it, right? I was like, I just don't feel like I said the right thing. And he actually validated. He's like, no, actually it was the first time I've ever really opened up to anybody about it. And it kind of came full circle. So I still check up often, right? But it was kind of nice to hear that it was helpful, even though I was like a little nervous about that. I just care a lot and I didn't want to lose him in my life. So. Challenging stigmas. Okay, that's calling it out. When we hear language that doesn't make sense, when we're in certain environments, how we talk. I love what you said about service members. We're our own worst enemy sometimes. We're very critical. I had that feeling myself. I'm just a behavioral health specialist, right? I'm a pogue, I have legs, I never jumped out of a plane. So that really, it really resonated with me. But when these things are out there, it's on us to call them out and also change how we're talking about it. Peer support. A lot of us are in the peer support space. Officially, unofficially. Again, everything I've ever learned came from a veteran. I mean, the first time I ever learned about my VA benefits, I was standing in line and this guy's like, oh, are you a veteran? Boom. Peer support networks are so powerful. And then promoting wellness. So for me, wellness is different for everybody. But promoting wellness, leaning into what you love. For veterans, there's not just VBA, VHA. It's not just about VA benefits and getting connected. I love to go on fishing trips. I've been to plays. I've done a lot of different things outside of the box in the veteran space, so there's a lot more ways we can look at wellness. Check in regularly, which I just talked about with my friend. Don't wait for that crisis. Let's start talking to people. If we don't think they're okay, ask. We don't want to regret not asking. And then offering practical help. What are those practical things in our community we can reach out to and we can send veterans to? We can attend ourselves, we can see how they go. Because I know a lot of veterans, I'm not sending anybody anywhere unless I know and trust where they're going. And I think that's the same for everybody in this room. Sharing your story. There's lots of different platforms to share your story. I share parts of my story here and there. Sometimes I share all of it, but I think every bit of it matters. Whether you had a super traumatic incident, whether you just got out and don't feel like you were taken care of on the way out of the door, it's all valid. Share that story so others can speak up. All right, so this was going to be a breakout session. We're running a little bit behind on time, so we're just going to have a few follow-up questions for the group. So as we talked about those actionable items we can do in our communities, we can do within ourselves, what actions can be taken to educate yourself and others about mental health and suicide?
So, excuse me. So For myself, I'm one of the tribal VSOs and program managers. When I took over the program, there was nothing. So my first goal was to start re-educating the tribal community on different elements of the military, from branch birthdays to national holidays. But part of that piece was also what monthly events are going on. So you take, for example, September Suicide Awareness Month nationally. How does that affect the military environment or the community? How does that affect the veteran community? You have that ability to integrate that into your community. You then start engaging more and more. I'll recommend military.com actually has a listing of all the national events and holidays that you can then use on social media. So I actually use Facebook, Instagram, all of those tools to engage into my community and draw out my veteran program and allow for education.
Thank you, I appreciate that share.
There's a couple of trainings. One is Safe Talk, which is like a 4-hour class that is helps people kind of identify what some of those warning signs might be, and lets people know just kind of how to get those people to someone who can help. And then there's Assist, which is the 2-day program where you can actually become somebody who can intervene and hopefully keep somebody alive. And both of those I know are available. I know we get them through the base, and they're usually free of charge. I know if anybody lives in the Pacific Northwest, and if you want to know when we have them at Naval Station Everett, they're done by our chaplains as part of the CREDA program, and they do have them constantly. They're great classes. If nothing else, it helps you be able to look at somebody in the eye and say, like, are you planning to kill yourself without feeling uncomfortable about it?
And what if they say yes?
And it tells you what to do if they say yes. So.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's like Learn Saves Lives, Save from the VA, we have Assist, we have mental health first aid. There's a lot of things out there to meet us where we're at.
I think being proactive in getting this to your teams before an incident happens, we tend to be reactive on things like this, and even from the military top structure, we were talking about this earlier. I think we judge commanders, we judge command on suicide rates. That's reactive. Why not measure saves?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Great call out. Hey, Chuck.
Yeah, one of the things, especially in rural areas, Jen and Keith's partner and everything, they have a lot of classes they will bring to you. And especially in the rural areas, if you've got a VFW or a Legion post, work with them, have one of these classes there, and make sure you invite some of the local first responders and stuff, but get the word out to veterans. And this is a way to educate people who maybe have contact with the veteran before you do. And so it can make a difference. And I say they travel all over. You just got to ask them. I abuse them. So that's one thing you can really do, especially in the rural areas. So utilize those post homes and get to know them and work with them, because they have access to the veterans before you do.
Great point, Chuck. Thanks for the shameless plug. I wasn't going to mention it, but we do. I mean, that's the thing we talked about after hours. I've taught classes Saturday night, Sunday morning. We've taught at the homes from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Like, we will do whatever it takes to get that training out there. So thank you.
About 30 years ago here in Spokane, there was a guy that was like a nationally known suicidologist. It was kind of a new thing. And it was the ABC thing. You ask them if they're going to hurt themselves, and then you believe them, and then you call ABC. Is there anything with the VA like that anymore? I mean,
Yeah, there's lots of acronyms floating around.
Okay, well, is there a hot one that you can give us right now? I mean, this is good too, but is the VA come up with something different?
Other than ABC?
And then say call 988, and otherwise saying call 988.
Thanks, Larry.
Right. Jen said it earlier, which is the acronym now is SAVE. So recognize the signs, ask the question, validate the experience, and expedite getting care. SAVE. The other thing I was going to say, since you gave me the mic, I'm going to take the opportunity.
Thanks, Larry.
Is, you also mentioned stigma about 988. I would challenge everybody to test it out.
Yeah.
Call 988. Let them know, hey, I'm Don from the WDVA. And I'm just seeing how long it took you to answer, or, you know, what this is like. And they're gonna be like, Dawn, great, thank you so much. Where are you calling from? Have a good night. And that's it. And if Dawn were to go into more detailed stuff, they'd have somebody talk to them about that. The only thing you don't want to do is call and then hang up because somebody actually answered and you get startled, because then they're gonna like worry about you and probably call you back or trace your phone. But the crisis line does not, you know, they're not going to send police out to your house automatically. They're not going to, you know, like Don mentioned, no one's going to pop out of the door and try and take you away. They're there to try and help you, and it's a great resource.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Good point. Good point on that. We had a member of our Veterans Court that reached out to me because it was during the holidays. And I was just proud that he reached out, and he tried to say, I'm sorry I'm reaching out. I need somebody to speak to. So fortunately, 2 of us in the house had phones, and one of us was trying to connect with his mentor. And he kind of cut off. And so I just said, where are you? Give me a call back.
Yeah.
We did do the 988, and though we were not the person self-reporting, we let them know, you know, is there a way that we could do a welfare check and all of that. He did fine. His mentor reached out. It was a cry for help. He got the help he needed. But one of the most important things, he felt guilty, but he also knew that we followed through. And by following through, he realized that we were really part of his network.
Yeah.
And knowing that he could trust us, and it's like, okay, somebody really does care.
Yeah.
It made the difference.
It's like you
and
care.
It did work.
You care. You could handle this tough situation, and by continuing to follow up, a person doesn't feel like a burden that they came to you and maybe like ruined your weekend or anything like that, right? All right, one more, and then we're gonna cruise on to our last learning objective, wrap up the training. Thanks, Holly.
I had a thought thinking about when you're interacting with someone that you know personally versus when you're a provider and you're interacting with someone that comes into your office or calls your number or sends you an email. And I think a lot of times when it's someone that we know personally, and we see this with like family caregivers and the burnout that they experience and the stress that they experience, is that we're used to a person being a certain way. And when those things start to change, then we don't really, like, we're still trying to react to who they were or what we know about them, and now they're presenting us with something that there's no place to put that in our mind. And I think it can be a lot more difficult when you're trying to help people that you know, or family, or people that you've known for a long time, whereas when someone is just coming into your office or calling or emailing you, then you have that unconditional compassion and love for them, which you have for your family as well, but you're also running into your own bias of who that person is.
Great call.
And so then when somebody that you know is coming to you with something, then maybe that's okay to say, you know, I'm having a harder time dealing with this because I know you, but let's do this phone call together. Let's go get the help together. I can support you in that way. Whereas, you know, when you're dealing with someone else, it actually can be a lot easier to deal with the stranger.
Yeah, absolutely. Really great point. Thank you. Quick point. Yeah.
So I'm going to give you the 30-second version of Safe Talk. When somebody's telling you about they're having issues, the way to approach the question is sometimes when people are, whatever you heard them say, they're having thoughts of suicide. Are you having thoughts of suicide? I challenge everyone, when you get back to your families, when you get with your friends, practice asking. Because it's the most uncomfortable conversation you have not had. So practice all the time. Practice on your dog like Dawn does. Practice.
My dog is okay.
I was gonna say, how is it?
She is fine.
Yes, so, but just get used to saying those words because we choke. And if we can't say the word suicide or kill yourself, they're gonna think we don't take it seriously.
Thank you, Connie. Yeah. A few more slides here. I want to go into promoting help-seeking behavior and what that looks like. So empowerment through reduced stigma. Excuse me. I'm gonna come out here. I don't like saying that. It makes me nervous. So our self-management of mental health, by reducing stigmas, we're reducing that inner guilt and that inner shame from those things we've heard in the society that we've internalized. We're able to make informed decision making advocate for ourselves, have the confidence to seek help and realize it is a strength, not a weakness. It's okay to ask for help. Openness about communicating about your needs. I don't know how many times I've been to the VA since 2013 and they asked me if I think about suicide, and I've never been honest. So it's hard to have that openness. And then proactive health management. So encouraged to monitor our own mental health. What does that look like to monitor our own mental health? Noticing our triggers. That's just one way. I had a conversation with Doc Ferguson this morning, and he reminded me that triggers are not just visual or audible. They're taste, their smell, they're everything. And so just to be mindful of that, to communicate that. And then our proactive health management. What are our signs of distress? Maybe we talk to our family about that. That was one of the first conversations I had with my mom. And I don't talk to you, it's not because I don't want to. It's because I'm struggling to say the words, right? So normalizing that and trying to address those signs before they escalate. How do we build a supportive network? I know darn well almost everybody in here is doing a really good job at that. I've heard so many powerful shares from this training I wasn't expecting to hear. So I really appreciate everybody for that. Creating that safe space where we can show up and we can share. I've gone to huddles with Vietnam era veterans recently, Permission to Start Dreaming Foundation in Gig Harbor, and I showed up and I almost walked back out. What do I have in common with Vietnam era veterans? They had it tough. We started kind of talking, and I realized we have so much in common, and they're so wise, and they've been through this, and they can share things with me, and I can share with them, and they completely validate that. Encouraging those resiliency practices, remembering it is a practice. We're not inherently resilient just because we're in the military. It's not true. It's practice. We have to practice self-care, practice those things. It's a holistic thing, right? It's not just one thing. And then our encouragement from others. I've said it a few times and I think it's so powerful. We normalize the conversations. We don't just have them when somebody's to that point they're thinking they'd be better off not here. And that happens everywhere in our life. Workplace, schools, families, maybe it's faith-based. Normalizing those conversations and talking about it. Even if you leave today, I know we heard so much at Serving Those Who Served. Go back and talk about it. Quick review on learning. So we talked about understanding what is a stigma. How does it impact us in many different facets? What can we do about it? What are those actionable steps that whether it's an organization or a person, we can do those little steps in our community to make a big difference. And then promote that help-seeking behavior by modeling, by learning those resources, thinking outside of the box. Again, for me, help-seeking behavior isn't just connecting to mental health care. It's holistic. It's a little bit of everything. Okay, we're gonna wrap up. I had goosebumps like this whole training. I was not expecting to be emotionally moved so many times. So powerful, powerful training. Part of what we wanted to create in this training was that connection in our own communities, in these spaces where I heard people sharing ideas with each other. We don't have all the ideas. So we're trying to create that platform where we can have those open, honest dialogues and learn and share. And I took quite a bit away from this today, and I hope everybody took a little bit that they can take home, think about, and process. You guys see the QR code? I see all your cameras. I appreciate you. Good, bad, or ugly. We want to hear it. Please. We value it. This training has only come so far because of so many valuable players and veterans in our space that saw many iterations of this and continue to give us feedback. We think we're getting pretty close. We do have our email up there on the screen. So that is connect@dva.wa.gov. You'll also find us on our DVA website. We can also hang out after the training if anybody wants cards or contact info. And then my last plug is if you guys want this training or the Learn Saves Lives Suicide Prevention training, we will come and do that anytime, anywhere, no matter the distance. Larry's also here. They also have SAVE. We have our Veterans Training Support Center, which hopefully you've learned about throughout the last couple days. So there are a lot of different avenues to get suicide prevention training, and they all have a lot of great information. So thank you so much for your shares and your time. We're wrapping up.
Don, stand up. Please big hand for Don.